Hi there, welcome to Drick's room. My name is Drick. When it comes to the Common App, you'll find a lot of advice online on things like your Common App essay, supplemental essays, and even your activities and award sections. But one thing that I haven't really seen covered much is the additional information section. It's kinda easy to miss, but if you head to the writing section of your Common App and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find a tab labeled Additional Information. This section gives you another 650 words, as the name suggests, to provide additional information that can't be found elsewhere on your application. For the 2020 to 2021 application cycle, there's also a separate area where you can write about any major impacts that COVID-19 or any natural disasters have had on you. This wasn't a thing back when I was applying to schools, so I can't really speak too much about it. But if the state of the world in the past year or so has had any deep and long-lasting effects on you, this is the place to talk about it. For other things, the additional information section is where you want to go. But before I really dive into things, I'd like to just say once again that I'm not an admissions officer or really any type of person qualified to give you any actual advice on college application matters, and everything I talk about comes from my own experiences applying to colleges. So a lot of this advice is gonna be pretty anecdotal, so please keep that in mind and take it all with a grain of salt. So like I mentioned, the additional information section isn't really talked about too much when you're trying to find advice online for it, when compared to other parts of the Common App. And I'd say that there's good reason for that, because to be honest, the additional information section probably isn't really that important. In a lot of cases, it doesn't actually really make any difference to application readers. So for a lot of applicants, this section doesn't really matter. As an example, I recently had the chance to take a look at my admissions file for Stanford University. If you're curious about what was in it, I'll drop a link to a video on it in the description below and in one of the corners above me. But essentially, my admissions file contained the comments that my application readers made while they read my application. In other words, the notes that they made can give insight into why they decided to admit me. And you want to know how many times they made note of the stuff I wrote in the additional information section? 0. Not a single mention. Now, does this mean that the additional information section is completely useless? I don't think so. Probably. I did put a couple things into my additional information, but none of my readers made any comments about them. I'd imagine that they did read through what I wrote there, but they may not have thought there was anything significant enough to warrant making any comments on it. But of course, this is all anecdotal, and the sample size here is just one. So just because my additional information section didn't seem to play a big role in my admissions, doesn't mean that it can't be influential in other people's admissions. I do want to be clear, however, that you don't actually need to fill out the additional information section if you don't have any actual substance to add. If you decide that you want to add 650 words of meaningless fluff, that's not going to help your case, and it might even hurt it. The additional information section is optional. Not like how Harvard has an optional supplemental essay that is most definitely not optional. This section here is actually truly optional. If you feel that you don't have anything that would warrant going under this section, don't worry about it. It would be better to leave it blank than put down stuff that's redundant or irrelevant. But with that said, what kind of stuff would actually belong here in the first place? You may find yourself asking right about now. Well, I'm glad you asked. So with the additional information section, you want to be giving them additional information. In other words, this is the place where you can talk about things that you couldn't really fit in anywhere else in your application, but you think are really important for your application readers to know. One of the biggest things I've heard people use for this is to explain any extenuating circumstances that may have impacted your application. For example, Maybe you stopped doing sports partway through high school because you had an injury. Or maybe you got really sick and had to be out of school for a while. Or maybe you couldn't really devote a lot of time to other extracurricular activities because you had to stay home and look over family members. These are examples of circumstances that have prevented you from being able to do the things that you would have been able to do otherwise. Things related to your health, your family, and so on that haven't already been addressed elsewhere in your application can go in this section. Another thing that I'd say can go here is further explanations of stuff on your application that hasn't already been made abundantly clear. For example, if you joined or started some kind of club or organization that is one of a kind or isn't very well known, it might be worthwhile to elaborate on what it is, since the descriptions in the activities section is limited to 150 characters, which may not let you say everything that needs to be said. This can also apply to the awards section, because if you received an award that your readers may not know about, or you need to explain the circumstances surrounding how you got the award in the first place, this section will give you the space to do just that. The awards section only really gives you space to write the title of the award, which may not give enough context depending on your situation. I don't think the awards section is really all that impactful to begin with unless your awards are really super impressive, but regardless, you can use the additional information section to flesh them out as needed. Another thing that you can talk about here is any other minor activity or accomplishment that you think is worth noting but couldn't fit in their respective sections. For example, if you somehow have more than 10 activities or you have more than 5 awards, you could list them here. In my application, I listed some minor school level awards that I got, and I'm pretty sure that I also talked about my YouTube channel in this section. Again, unless your additional activities and awards are super amazing, they may not actually make a super big difference in your applications. In my Stanford file, one of my readers only made note of the first 5 activities I listed and didn't even mention any of my awards. Of course, that's just an anecdote, and it is completely possible that my achievements weren't all that impressive to my readers in the first place, but I think it's still worth taking note of. I'd say that you can go ahead and list more activities and awards here if you think it's something that could potentially contribute to your application at best and not be detrimental at worst. So for example, if you have National Honor Society here, it could help your application, but it probably wouldn't hurt it. But on the other hand, if you listed something like starting a pyramid scheme, best case scenario is that it doesn't affect your application, and worst case scenario is that it does hurt your application. Please do not start or participate in pyramid schemes or anything of the sort. So now that we have an idea of what kinds of things could go in the additional information section, what about things that shouldn't go in this section? I'd say that one big thing to avoid is writing another essay. You know, all the text boxes that the Common App gives you can be pretty restricting when you want to say more but physically cannot. So this additional information section looks pretty tempting. I mean, it's another 650 words free for the taking. It's free real estate. But even though you have all these words to work with, it's important to be as concise as possible. Maybe you had a couple ideas for what you wanted to write your Common App essay on, and think that the additional information section is a place where you can put down one of the other ideas you had. Or maybe your original Common App essay went over the 650 word limit, and you want to use the space as a continuation of it. Either way, this isn't going to be super practical for strengthening your application because your readers do not spend a whole lot of time looking through your application. It's almost like they're skimming or speed reading it. So if they see that you have another whole essay here, I imagine that they're not going to be too happy about that. And I've heard that doing that could even end up hurting your application. This means that we don't want to write too much. Concise is the name of the game here. For whatever you decide to talk about, be sure to say it in as few words as possible. It's fine if you don't use complete sentences or omit non-essential words. This is most definitely not the place to be displaying your eloquent writing skills. The goal is to be as objective and straightforward as you can. Another thing that isn't a good idea to bring up in this section is to try to explain things like bad grades or kinda give excuses for them. So as an example, imagine you have all A's all throughout high school, except for one B+ you got in sophomore year. You don't really need to explain why you have a B+ instead of an A. Application readers probably wouldn't even think twice about it, and having one B+ instead of an A is never gonna be the deciding factor between you getting into a school versus not. It's really a non-issue, so there's no need to be making a mountain out of a molehill. But if you do go ahead and say things like how your teacher was a really harsh grader and that everyone in that class had lower grades than usual, or if you say that your teacher didn't really like you in particular for whatever reason, or if you say that you just weren't prepared for the challenges of taking your first AP class, I don't think that admissions readers will particularly care. Again, trying to explain away one bad grade probably won't really change a reader's overall evaluation of your grades. If they see that you have consistently high grades but one slightly lower grade, that won't be enough to sway their decision one way or another. In fact, it's possible that taking the time to explain one bad grade could show readers that the applicant might be too focused on having perfect grades, which could actually have a negative impact on your application. If you think about it, your application to a school is kinda like a sales pitch, where the school you're applying to is like a potential investor. If you want to be successful, you should focus on your strengths as much as possible, instead of trying to give excuses for your flaws, which could bring more unwanted attention to them than had you not done that at all. If you do want to put stuff down in this section, it should only be things that can help your application, or at least not do any harm to it. In the first place, this additional information section is completely optional, so don't force yourself to write stuff down for the sake of writing stuff down. As I mentioned earlier, this section probably isn't that important to begin with. As seen with my own admissions file, my readers didn't even make any note of it, likely because nothing I had there was that significant to them. I would imagine that for most applicants, this section isn't gonna mean all that much unless it's something that is actually pretty big. So in short, the additional information section is there. If you have something meaningful to put there, awesome. If you don't have anything to add, that's also awesome. Use it if you need it, don't use it if you don't. That is all. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Hit like if you liked, subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.